The Lawyer Who Rocks is brought to you by Hughes Media Law Group. You can visit us at hmlglaw.com. Keep up with the podcast on social media at HMLG Law on all major platforms and be sure to follow us there. Thank you for listening and enjoy this episode of The Lawyer Who Rocks. My name is Joleen Winther Hughes. I am a lawyer who rocks.
When it comes to having your back, there ain't nobody better. This you better believe. Joleen, you know
Welcome to part 2 of my interview with Oscar Award-winning filmmaker T.J. Martin. Today we'll talk about his filmography, how networking helped him win an Oscar, and of course, what makes T.J. a badass. Please enjoy. I think that there's an element of skepticism about lawyers and legal stuff, but how important has that been for you as you've moved further and further on in your career? I'm sure that with having a partner and whether you're setting up different productions, I mean, how important is that role in protecting yourself?
I spent less time thinking about the business. Like my least favorite part of making a film is getting it off the ground. And I'm sure a lot of people that's their least favorite part. But what I've come to realize and I've come to deeply appreciate, I find myself actually spending more time understanding the inner workings of the business of it because it fundamentally will inform the creative, our agents and our legal side. And what they do actually is they provide a really incredibly important foundation for us so that we don't have to think of those things. But, part of the intent of having this platform is also to be able to executive produce and lend my name and also just kind of consult creatively. The one thing I'm reminded of in working with them is because they don't have representation, because they don't have legal representation on top of that, is they spend a tremendous amount of time running a business and not being a filmmaker. Every filmmaker is kind of always has, especially nonfiction, you definitely producing, even if you call yourself a director, you're fundamentally even just making a phone call to set up a time to interview somebody, that's producing work. But these independent filmmakers, you forget how much heavy lifting they're doing all behind the scenes so that they can even get to the place of making their film. And that continues from the birth of the project through to, and if you're lucky enough that you actually finish the film, through to the very end when you're navigating, and especially at the end when you're navigating distribution or going to festivals and figuring out what the contracts are for these other partners that are coming on board to actually help get your film seen. That is a masterclass in business, not a masterclass in filmmaking, a masterclass in business. I'm very privileged in the sense that I can engage in those conversations, but I don't have to do that much back channeling to figure out how things are going to be negotiated because I have a team that takes the lead on all that stuff.
Let's talk about some of the short films that led up to The Undefeated, which is where you won your first Academy Award. I say first because there'll be more.
Over the course of, the next, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 years of staying in Seattle and really focusing on craft, the next kind of big personal revelation I had was I found myself doing too much and being spread too thin, that I wasn't excelling in one particular department. And so I actually moved to Hawaii. During that time, I couldn't find work. And I was fortunate enough to actually be a PA on this really awful TV series down there. I got in good with the AD department. And I actually showed him, I was like, I usually shoot and I cut and I kind of was a jack of all trades of sorts. And I showed them my work and they were like, if you moved to LA, you'd probably get a lot of work. My intention was always to move to New York. I visited Los Angeles and crashed on the couch of who was then the production manager for the show. And actually ended up just staying in LA and crashed on her couch for like 3 months before I was able to get a gig as an editor. And then I eventually kind of moved out on my own. But there was a very clear intention for me, which was if I'm going to go to LA, what facet of myself am I selling? And I landed on editorial. I didn't have the means and the finances to have my own camera and build out the lenses, and in order to keep a low overhead but yet to be a core creative, meaning, producer, director, editor, director of photography, production designer, someone who's in that core group, I landed on editorial because it's the old school way of understanding how to direct because you are the one piecing the story together. And you're working directly with directors and you can kind of start to see how they see things and how they work through problems. So when I landed in LA, I was just an editor, which is always interesting because you go to LA and you start going to parties and everyone's like, oh, I'm a producer, I'm a director. We all know, like, what do you really do to pay the bills, right? They're like, they're slanging coffee and they call themselves a director. Feel like, look, I'm an editor, and it's amazing how many people are disinterested in who you are and what you have to say the moment you say you're an editor. Hopefully that's changed. But that's kind of, in doing that, is how I started understanding the art of storytelling more. That led to my involvement in Undefeated.
And you have a directing partner, correct?
Yeah, I was working for a company that did background visuals for like top 40 acts. So I was working at this boutique agency, and then I was kind of really chomping at the bit to get back into kind of storytelling. And I didn't know really that many people at all in LA, but the one friend of a friend was working at a production company, and they were getting ready to shoot a documentary on the World Series of beer pong. So I took a meeting with them, and that's where I actually met my now after of, wow, like 14 years, my directing partner of 14 years. First time we met was they were interviewing me to be the editor for this beer pong movie. This team had gone out and filmed the second World Series of beer pong, which is in the like Mesquite, Nevada, which is like an hour outside of Vegas. And it's like a 3-day tournament with, a bunch of bros getting drunk and competing for, I think it was $100,000 for first place, something like that. So it grown into this thing. So, thousands of like frat boys descended on Mesquite, Nevada. But that kind of cemented our friendship and this desire to continue working together. It ended up being, we almost got into Sundance, but that film ended up, got picked up and it aired on Spike. It was part of Morgan Spurlock picked it up. It was part of like Morgan Spurlock Presents, this new kind of thing he was rolling out. But it wasn't till I think another year. I went back to editing. Dan, the comedy thing didn't pan out and he didn't get any other directing jobs. So he was a graveyard shift assistant editor for about a year. And it was our friend, actually his friend, who he worked in the studio system and he was leaving that. He had a knack for finding stories and worked in the studio system, optioning books and articles and stuff like that. He left. He's a avid, college football enthusiast. And he went to University of Tennessee and he one night, as he says, was going down their kind of recruiting list because, that's, I guess, what you do. But he stumbled upon this high school student that everyone was kind of raving about. He's like, how did I never hear about him? His name was O.C. Brown. And he looked this kid up, and that brought him to this article that was written about him in Memphis about how he would spend weekends with his grandmother in North Memphis, the weekdays living with his coach in East Memphis. And if you know anything about Memphis, it's very literally the other side of the train tracks. North Memphis is, predominantly black, if not, 99.9% black. In East Memphis is the complete opposite, mansions everywhere, very affluent, very white. And so he sent that article to Dan. Dan sent it to me. We thought if you could put a camera out and just tell this kind of coming of age story. You spend a year with him going through his senior year, and you just kind of watch what it's like to navigate these two worlds. Obviously, that was of interest to me growing up as a mixed race in Seattle and kind of, again, navigating multiple worlds and what we now call code switching and figuring out how to, preserve the integrity of who you are during. That was the beginning of us moving to Memphis for 9 months and, embedding ourselves with this high school football team and then editing it for 9 months and then getting picked up by the Weinstein Company and then going on, doing press for 9 months and just watching this little film become an Academy Award winning film.
I mean, how do you actually get nominated for an Academy Award? I'm just dying to know.
Once the film was almost done, again, through the help of Seth, his instinct was to get a sales rep through William Morris, through at WME
The sales rep is for distribution, right?
for distribution. Yeah, exactly. I mean, this was like a foreign language. I don't understand any of this stuff. And
But distribution is important so people can actually see the film in theaters or on, HBO or wherever you get it placed, right?
I mean, to a certain degree, if you don't have distribution, you could beg the question, does the film even exist? Right? If you don't see it, like no one's going to see it. My understanding at the time was, oh, you apply for festivals, you go to festivals, and then someone buys it. Obviously, that was changing then and has changed dramatically now. But the strategy we used was to get a film rep, start slipping this film to people under the radar through individual relationships and to try to get a bidding war going for it. They felt it was that strong. I kind of followed their lead in that regard. And that's essentially what happened. So we got into premiere at South by Southwest. And funny enough, they didn't necessarily want the film. The production company, Spitfire, had a film on the Foo Fighters, actually, that South by really, really wanted. And Glenn, the producer, was like, well, if you want the Foo Fighters doc, you have to take this high school football doc. And they were like, okay, we'll take it. So we kind of slid in on the cape of Dave Grohl and the Foo Fighters.
But that's the relationship aspect, right? Like, you can't stress the importance of the relationships you build.
100%. But while that was happening, behind the scenes, Disney was showing interest in the film, Paramount was showing interest in the film, and the Weinstein company was showing. Those were the kind of the big ones that started as everyone else kind of fell off. They were the big ones because they saw rights in the a value in the remake rights. You couldn't have scripted it any better in terms of the series of events that take place. A bidding war started, and when we went to South by Southwest, the story I was told was that Harvey had been told about this film and didn't watch it until someone flew out from LA to New York that morning with the film in hand. He watched it in his personal screening room and went to his David Glasser, who pretty much ran the company, and said, I want you to fly down to Austin and don't come back without that film. Our film was screening so late. And so we were kind of positioned at a weird slot, a party before that. And during the pre-party, a gentleman came up, introduced himself. He said, my name's David Glasser with the Weinstein Company. I'm here to buy your film. And I was like, oh, okay. My name's TJ. I guess I made the film with Dan. It was totally surreal. And so what happened is that evening, they actually negotiated with the Weinstein Company, the sale. And the next morning, we got a call from Seth that said, congratulations, you sold your film to the Weinstein Company. So that's the backstory of getting it sold. So to actually answer your question, we had the best company at winning awards.
Out there promoting it, right?
Well, they just understand that world and they're just a machine. By the time it came to awards circuit, we became the face and the identity of the film, and they just kind of pushed us everywhere. And what you end up doing is you end up having a lot of press from festivals and stuff like that. Even if the film does well in theaters, now you have to convince people as to why it should be considered Academy worthy. At the time, you had to do a qualifying run. So it had to play in theaters at minimum a week in both LA and New York, which we did. We had a theatrical release. And then you essentially try to get the Academy's attention. And what you end up doing is a lot of celebrity hosted events, and celebrities can kind of will screen the film and we'll do Q&As. They're advocating on behalf of the power of the film. What's the resonance it had with them? So this whole other thing in addition to press that you do that's very specifically guided towards the Academy itself. And so that becomes a full-time job in its own right. And you just do a bunch of that. And also, the other thing the Weinstein Company managed to do is you need to have a presence everywhere. In the marketing of the film, you have a presence on NPR, on CNN, and kind of the public facing. For Oscar campaigning, you have a presence in industry facing. They sent us to every party. We had no business being there. We're like these documentary people and like celebrities around us everywhere. They're just like, who are you guys? Like, what are you doing here? And so But the idea is that we start talking about our film. As you know, you create buzz, and before you know it, people like George Clooney are talking about how it's one of their favorite films of that year. We did some work with Casey Affleck, and after every game, they give a student an award, the Uncommon Man Award, for showing a sign of doing something for somebody else other than yourself, right? And so Casey would say that he and his brother Ben Affleck would start calling each other the Uncommon Man. It became a thing in their household, right? It's just this buzz that gets built. People feel the need that they have to see the film, and hopefully, at the end of the day, though, I still firmly believe that as much as you do all that campaigning and stuff, the film has to it has to stand on its own legs. And so, still, I'm a big advocate of, like, if you want to be a director or filmmaker, your primary job is to make the best piece of work and let cream rise to the top. So even if you're not there to campaign, even if you're not there for the press, the film has to hold its own power.
So let's talk about how that led to now where you are, because you have a lot of really great opportunity now and you have a lot more pull in the industry because of these levels that you've walked through, right?
With the success of Undefeated, it was kind of like, on the outside, everyone's like this overnight success, but whatever I'm sparking to, I kind of want to pursue that thing and make that thing. And maybe that's better suited for a photography project. Maybe that's better suited for a scripted narrative. We made a feature length doc in between Undefeated and LA 92. And while we were finishing this film that I shall not name, two producers, Simon Chin and Jonathan Chin, that are cousins, they had conceived of an idea to make a film for the 25th anniversary of the civil unrest in Los Angeles, also known as the Rodney King riots in 1992. They asked us if we were interested, and they sent us a sizzle, and the sizzle really wasn't that good, but there were some moments in it from the archive. I was brought right back to that place, and I was only 11 or 12 when the events actually unfolded. And there was something about the rawness in the archive itself. And also, this is the beginning of this notion. Now everyone has a camera on their phone. We didn't have that then, but it was the beginning of this idea of citizen journalism. So we dig a little bit more digging, and you realize that, oh, there's a ton of archives. So the intent was, they had already set it up with National Geographic, and they were just looking for directors to helm it. And our pitch back to them was, we'd be interested in doing this if we could do it archive only, not archive heavy with some supporting voices, just purely an archive film. Can you treat it like a narrative or a verite film, and you use the archive to give it a narrative propulsion? And they said yes. And then we realized, oh shit, we had to make this thing. It really should have been a year and a half, 2 year long project, but it ended up being we had 9 months to finish that on time. I mean, that project almost killed me. And it's a deeply experiential film, only told through archive, where the main character is essentially the city of Los Angeles that goes through this kind of event. Actually, that won an Emmy as well for special merit in documentary filmmaking or something like that. We got shortlisted for the Oscars, but we're not nominated. And that was with National Geographic. We were able to build a relationship with National Geographic. We started executive producing material for them, which in our case, it's really just a lot of creative consultation. It's weird to say this now because I don't think our name has pull, but now they use our names for posters and stuff like that. It's super surreal to me. But then the relationship we built with Simon and Jonathan Chin, who their company's Lightbox, actually led also to Tina. So that came out in 2017. And quickly after that, Simon reached out to us again. They've been doing some video, like ancillary supporting materials for Tina the musical. And they did it so they could develop a relationship with Tina Turner and her husband, Irwin, because as they do, because they wanted to sell her on this idea of doing a feature length documentary on her. He was telling us this and over lunch, and we were like, cool, that sounds fun. I'm curious who's going to direct that. Didn't even think about like us being involved. And then he asked if we were willing to helm it. And it took us some time before we committed to that film. We were pretty hesitant for a variety of reasons. One being, we weren't certain two men should be helming the Tina Turner story. We kind of just knew the real broad strokes of it. And we didn't know exactly what you could explore versus just making a film about her catalog. once we started diving in, we read Itina, the Kurt Loder book. We started realizing that there is potentially an amazing film here. And the only way we would do it is if we could think of story first. We're not going to get involved if oftentimes, what's become now in vogue is like these celebrity driven docs or music driven docs, but they're really doing is servicing a body of work and not telling a story. Tina lived an incredible life. Her narrative has to be up front and center. And can we create a space to get her own perspective on her own narrative and how that's been perceived in the public eye? Because she's very different than the perception of who she is. We started finding these kind of nuances between these two Tinas. And we were like, that's interesting. And so we were really fortunate that everybody on board was down for that. And that this film was already set up with HBO doing domestic distribution and Universal doing international distribution. So Lightbox had already kind of created the infrastructure and really just needed some directors to come in and helm it. And so that's kind of where we got to Tina. And then Tina, we finished it unfortunately during quarantine and it premiered at Berlin, but we didn't get a chance to go to the Berlin Film Festival, which broke my heart. And then we just got nominated for 3 Emmys, including Best Nonfiction Film and Best Direction.
You're now nominated for an Emmy for Tina Turner. Your mom, Tina, was an icon in Seattle. I mean, I really, I look at that. It's like, did just your experiences growing up in music really help you maybe relate as you were making the film with Tina?
Tina Turner's story is so different and it's so unique in even just kind of the wealth of stories that we have in the music world. It embodies a lot of different things, right? It's this kind of crazy rags to riches. I mean, she was born to sharecroppers. At a child, she was picking cotton, and now she lives in a castle in Zurich. It's rags to riches. It's a story of a survivor. It's a coming of age film. It's all these, it embodies so many different things. It's like an odyssey. It's like a saga almost. But to your point, I think it was the other way around because doing press, someone asked me something similar. I don't know if my experience with my mom helped me better understand Tina Turner's story, but I think understanding Tina Turner's story shed some light on the experience of my mother. The personal growth from making that film has happened kind of after making the film. Me having a deeper appreciation for what Tina Bell, my mom, went through in her own narrative, being a Black woman in Seattle in the 80s, trying to navigating the music scene and, in a mostly white boys club.
What are your dream projects coming up that you can talk about?
Dream project actually would be carving out time for myself to write my parents' story. And part of it as an homage to them, I don't know how to position it, but what a privilege it would be to spend time exploring your own narrative and having such a surreal of an experience and then give that to the world. Not many people get that weird kind of surreal opportunity. In that sense, I think it would just be so odd for me, for me to do the experience of it would be so odd that that's become definitely something I'm hoping to sooner than later, hopefully.
That's awesome. Well, we miss your mom and your dad very much. We lost your dad last year and lost your mom a few years back. I know that having known your dad pretty well, for him to see you where you are now, even back when you first got nominated for the Academy Award for Undefeated, I know he'd be so proud of you. And just like, the fact that you're actually living out maybe what his dream might have been in a different medium. But I just think you're such a badass in your own right. And I will end the podcast by asking you why you think you're a badass.
The more I find myself having a invested interest in empathy, honestly. How do you create works? How do you live by a code like that? So even in times of frustration, making sure you're stepping back and whatever it might be, listening to your life partner, your creative partner, business dealings, and really putting yourself in other people's shoes and trying to understand where they're coming from. And then also doing it putting it in the work, regardless of the genre it takes or the form it takes. How do we create a space so we can like better understand each other? Every time I think, I find myself realizing that I'm having more interest in that. That feels right to me, and so that's all I can go off of, really.
I think it's perfect, honestly. Well, this has been a marathon, and I appreciate you staying on and just telling your story so eloquently. Thank you so much for being on the podcast, TJ.
Appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to The Lawyer Who Rocks. If you've enjoyed it and want to hear more from business badasses, make sure you hit the subscribe button wherever you get your podcasts. While you're at it, please give us a review. It really helps us grow the show. The Lawyer Who Rocks is produced and edited by Sean Fox and HMLG. A big thank you to Aaron Jones for our theme music, to Jeff Gilbert at Hairball Media for our graphics, and a huge thanks to my entire team at HMLG. If you need a lawyer who rocks, find us at hmlglaw.com. On the next episode,
we will statistically talk about anything else: sex, death, politics, religion. We'll talk about anything else that's taboo before we'll have a financial conversation, especially as women.
This podcast has been brought to you by HMLG. If you need lawyers who rock, visit us on our website at hmlglaw.com and be sure to follow us on social media platforms at HMLG Law. You can also follow me on Instagram at The Lawyer Who Rocks. We each have our roles.